Welcome to the Sports Trading Card Hall of Fame. Today I'm going to be introducing Chapter 13, where I'm going to be talking about the Michael Jordan Star XRC. I'm going to be talking about a very unusual person in the sports card world, which is Chris Martin. And then but first I'm going to elevate the Nolan Ryan rookie card to the binder of fame. And with the Nolan Ryan rookie card, I'm not really going to be talking so much about the card itself because there's not a lot to talk about with it. It's not a very famous card because it doesn't have an iconic look. It's not just Nolan, it's also got another player on it, and the card set itself doesn't have a very distinct iconic look, but also Nolan Ryan himself was never at that particular level of fame and legend to be able to resonate over the years. And it's a weird thing to say because for those of us in the late 80s and early 90s, he is an absolute giant. And even today he's very popular. But the thing is, he was never out there winning World Series and getting all these Cy Young awards, etc. The thing about Nolan was he was just so consistent at being right up among the top pitchers. So he really became famous right at the end of the 80s as he was heading in on the age of 40 years old and had one of the fastest fastballs and was still hitting pitching no-hitters. And it was just strange to see an athlete who could hold up that long. In a way, it's kind of like an inverse of LeBron James, where LeBron James had a really powerful center to his career. And then as he got to the end of his career, people were still amazed at how athletic he was, but he was no longer at the top of his game and moving to a higher level. LeBron James has been fading in his later years, as you would expect, but holding up unusually well. Nolan Ryan, it was almost like his best pitching was at the end of his career. It at least felt that way, and that's what really inspired us at that time. So he became famous later on in his career. Kind of like Cal Ripken Jr., where when Cal Ripken was about ready to break the Lou Gehrig record, all of a sudden everybody went, whoa, and then he became the big superstar. But there was something else about the Nolan Ryan rookie card that really made it famous, and that's what I want to talk about here, which is that there was an event, I'll get into it in a second, but an event caused a story or a conversation across the hobby. And in the early 90s, a hobby-wide conversation was rare. And that was because we lived in an analog world, which meant that when we had a conversation, it was always local. And we had our conversation in our local community, and then the next community had theirs, and everybody had these little conversations. And then you would have the traveling roadshow that was the sports card show, traveling around the country, moving stories and conversations and perspectives. We did have some magazines, so there was the Beckett, there was Tough Stuff, there were opportunities like that to spread voices outward quite a bit, and then you also had editorials within those that allowed for some voices to be heard as well. But in order to have a big conversation, you have to have a big audience, and we just didn't have one at the time. So it took some subject that everybody was affected by, like when Finest started to put protectors on top of their cards. Do you pull it off or do you leave it on? We had those conversations nationwide, group by group, and then card show by card show. But it was rare that we would have something at the scale of the ethics of what happened with the Nolan Ryan rookie card. And that was because what happened with the Nolan Ryan rookie card was exactly that. It was all about ethics. The story is this. The Nolan Ryan rookie card in the early 90s was, okay, I can't remember how much it was worth at the particular time. I'm just going to say $23,000. I'm just going to throw that out there. It's something that I can keep easily on my mind, so I'm just going to go with that. So $23,000. You had this card shop, and in it they had a card, and instead of putting 23,000, they just said 23. That was it. And everybody knew what it meant because everybody knew what it was. Well, a new employee was hired, and on his first day on the job, the card shop owner was out, and a kid walked in and tried to see if he could pull something off. So he asked the clerk how much that Nolan Ryan card was. The clerk looked down and said 23 dash and went, that's $23. Kid whipped out $23 or 25 in order to cover tax, bought it, went home. Card shop owner comes in, sees that the Nolan Ryan rookie has been sold. Great, where's the money? And the attendant went, "It's in the till." $23,000 in the till? No, $23 in the till. So now the card shop owner realized that the business made a mistake, but he knew who the kid was, and so he reached out to the kid and said, "Hey, come on, you got to clean this up." Kid said, "No, you sold it to me." So he reached out to the kid's father, and the father backed up the kid. Now we have a conversation. And this is the problem with the situation, is that you have two sides of the debate. One side is the shop made a mistake. In fact, the kid asked and was told the price and fairly paid the price. So obviously the card shop made the mistake, and they have to respect the consequences. But at the same time, you have a father whose attitude is, my kid tried to rip off the store and succeeded, and I'm going to defend the kid. So you have two ethical quandaries. On the one hand, the card shop made a mistake and has to be able to respect that. But at the same time, you have a kid who tried to con a store, and it's not that the kid was trying to get away with it, it's that the father was protecting the kid from trying to rip him off. You want to talk about fodder for a conversation? This is perfect. Because when you have a conversation like this, you very quickly learn about a person's ethics. When I think about if somebody mislabels something on eBay, and I look and I realize that, oh, it's mislabeled, so most people don't realize that that is mislabeled. To me, that means this is a golden opportunity for me to get something for less money. That's because, for me, I see it as the image is there, everybody can see it, and so it still has a fair quality to it. It's just that it's not as easily accessed for other people trying to pursue it. That's my attitude, but that's because of the way that I collect. I've never had a lot of money, so I'm waiting for good opportunities. I get that side of it. But that's for a bidding environment where everybody's bidding. For crying out loud, everybody has a fair shot to put their bid in. You got plenty of time. And so it's just that nobody else has stumbled upon it and taken advantage of it. Is there an ethical conundrum that goes along with this? Yes, obviously there is. And the debate is definitely a debate that is had. But then there's another case where somebody knows that what they're doing is wrong. And in a situation like that, if a person tries to do that, that's their thing. And that's unfortunate. But what about when it comes to fatherhood? And once you step into that space of, is somebody a good father or a bad father? The paternal or the parental teaching responsibility. This is where it gets really heated and really, really spicy, because now you're getting into more emotions, a whole bag of emotions. And we didn't really know how to cope with that, which is why we needed a conversation like this to begin an ethical discussion. Prior to that, our ethical discussion was, is counterfeiting bad? Unless you're a counterfeiter, yes, counterfeiting is bad. But now we're dealing with just a normal parental style versus yours, that kind of thing. And it was interesting because we were doing it community by community. You're having a community discussion, and it kind of balances out how well these debates can happen. But now we live in a different world. We live in a digital world where everybody is in the same platform, everybody's voices are available, and we'll have a situation pop up and we'll have 20, 30 different YouTube channels where somebody goes out and puts their 2 cents in. And then these people respond to that, and these people respond to that, and people get their feelings hurt. And it's really kind of a case of telephone, the classic game where you're whispering a message. And when you hear it, you may mishear it, or you may misinterpret it. And when you say it, you're not necessarily saying verbatim what you heard. And so now you may be changing it, and then it changes and changes and changes. And so we'll have a case here in our current environment where somebody will go out and make a video. They won't word it right. Somebody else will hear what they said, get caught on the wrong piece of information, or maybe they get caught on a piece of information that was communicated and not picked up that there was something not really communicated that was really the message. They respond to that. Now this person gets hurt, and then that person's responding to them, and all of a sudden you got this big battle going on between people for absolutely no reason. It's difficult to have a healthy conversation now, but for a very different reason. In the junk wax era, it was difficult to have a conversation because it was a local conversation. Now it's a universal general space where everybody has a voice, everybody has a perspective, and everybody has a different way of wording things and interpreting things. And even at that, as you're communicating whatever you're communicating, you're hoping that you're saying all the things you want to say and you don't get hung up on something. Here on this channel, I've started doing book reports on various channels, and in my attempts to give a brief synopsis of a channel, I may get caught up on one little portion of it where as I'm trying to explain it, I get kind of convoluted in it, and I have a tough time getting out of it, and it all of a sudden becomes a point of emphasis that I didn't intend for it to. And now somebody else who hears it hears that focus and then goes, oh, well, that's like something he doesn't like, or that's the big problem with the channel. Whereas I'm just trying to navigate around it in a minor way and turning it into a major way. That is a big part of the problem that we have as we communicate in this very, very different environment. If we had a conundrum at the level of that, well, we have situations like that happen, but it was such a unique event, mainly because it was a case that has happened. It was an egregious case, but those kinds of things happen all the time. That just happened to be the one that was able to hit the nationwide conversation at that time. But now we have too many voices and too many subjects to talk about, and it convolutes the ability for us to have the type of meaningful conversations that we have to have, because everybody's a victim. And that's why personally I stay out of all modern topics, because one, I don't see that there's really a reason for me to contribute my voice and my perspective. It just, enough is being said, my perspective isn't necessary. But the other reason is because I don't want to be a part of either the crowd that is all agreeing with themselves or with each other and becomes kind of a big conglomerate, or the people who are getting misinterpreted, or a person may perceive me to be saying something negative about them. I don't want to get into any of that crap. I'm just here to talk about cards, and so I do. But it is fascinating to see the wild difference between a time when it took a card as iconic as the Nolan Ryan rookie card to be able to create a nationwide conversation, and now where it takes almost nothing to create a big stink. I don't mean to say anything negative about anybody who is commenting in today's environment. It's really more a matter of just how quickly things can go awry from a statement that a person makes that they think is benign, which again is a big part of why I like to stay out of it in this day and age. But the Nolan Ryan rookie card certainly was famous enough to create that discussion, and in turn, it helped that rookie card to become a more iconic card. Big part of its journey. And that's what I wanted to say here, which is kind of long-winded, but I'm going to leave this as the discussion about that card here with the Binder of Fame entry. I am going to do separate videos for the other two topics, though, which the first of those is, well, another very controversial card, but from a very different era, the Michael Jordan Star XRC. And what I mean by this being a card from a card from a different era is not that the card itself was from a different era, but the debate is from a different era. Here's how I'm going to put it. As far as I'm concerned, the Michael Jordan Star XRC is the Phantom card. There are a lot of Phantom cards out there, but that is the Phantom card. And what I mean by that is it didn't exist in the early 1990s when Michael Jordan and his cards were becoming really popular. Yes, there were about 500 copies out there, but you never saw them. You know why you never saw them? Because there were too many card shops for the number of copies of that card. Okay, so I have recently heard somebody say that there are more people in the hobby now or recently than there were at the height of the junk wax era, because there was some dumb statistic that somehow figured out how many people were in the hobby in the 1990s, which right off the bat, let me just say, if you see that number, throw it out the window. That's a load of crap. There's no way that you could possibly grasp how many people were in the hobby in 1990 and 1991, because there was no way to see all the people there. Even today, it would be extremely difficult. But here's some basic math. I grew up in a small town, less than 10,000 people. the entire community had about 50,000 people. And by community, I mean the whole county. And then there was a large town off this direction, a large town. They had card shops. But in my community, my overall community of about 50,000 people, in 1992 or so, at its height, we had 5 card shops. 5 card shops. That's a card shop per 10,000 people. If you think that today we have a lot of card shops, well, then you must live in a city. Because if you live in a large town or a small city, you know you're lucky to have 5 card shops in a small city at this point. The reality is, if you look at the entire country, every area where there was a significant number of people, and I'm not talking packed together in a town, I mean general regions of 50,000 here, 50,000. You think about how many of those there are, and if you figure there were 2 to 5 card shops per, that's a lot of card shops. That's not thousands, that's tens of thousands of card shops. And that's the reality of the hobby at that time, was the hobby was that prolific that all of those card shops could exist at the same time. There were so many of us out there. So let's just say there were 10,000 card shops. And there are 500 Jordan XRCs, the Jordan Star cards. That means that for every, 20 card shops, there's 1 Jordan card. And that's assuming that no collectors are holding on to them, that there's 1 in each card shop. Which means how many communities would you have to go through to ever see the thing? You would probably only see it at a card show. So for us in the early 90s, we knew Star existed because we saw Dikembe Mutombo cards, and we saw Bobby Hurley cards, and we saw Jose Canseco cards. You might see a David Robinson card. But did you see cards from 1984 and 1985? Possibly. Did you see a Jordan? No. No, you just didn't. It was not part of the collecting landscape. That's the reality of it. So I'm going to do that as a teaser. It's something to just kind of get in your mind about the nature of this very unique card. I want to get more into it in the standalone video, but I'm going to leave this as the discussion here so that I can continue on this video and close out with talking about a person who you almost guaranteed to have never heard of, Chris Martin. So Chris Martin was a linebacker for the Kansas City Chiefs. There alongside Derek Thomas, behind Neil Smith. He was, early 90s was the time when he was really playing, and he was never an all-pro, but he was a Pro Bowler, so he was a solid player. But what made him significant is that he went out and he started a career. There have been a lot of players who have been somewhat well known for having careers outside of the game that have prepared themselves for retirement. John Elway with car dealerships. Jim Otto, the offensive lineman or the center, I should say, for the Oakland Raiders in the 60s and the 70s, opened a couple of Burger King franchises, which allowed him, when he retired, to be one of the few linemen from the 60s and 70s to actually have a decent career after he retired. Those players are always lauded for starting a career that has a really good opportunity to continue their income in the future. Oftentimes we hear about restaurants. That's a common thing that you'll see. But, well, Pinnacle went ahead and did a whole series of subset cards in 91 and 92 dedicated to this. But Chris Martin did something different. He was one of 2 players to start a sports card company. Only that's not exactly true. But unlike Upper Deck, which was literally designed to be a sports card, Chris Martin wanted to cover a different community, which is he wanted to focus on young kids. Because in the 1980s, sports cards were for young kids, and adults could collect them too. But those kids continued to collect the same cards into the 1990s, and the hobby was keeping up with them, which means that by 1992, there wasn't really a good place for kids. You did have Triple Play that was made by Don Russ that was intended to inspire kids. A little expensive for kids, but Topps was now doing their Topps Gold, which was trying to cater to older audiences. You had inserts in Fleer and in Score that were trying to get kids to collect them. ProSet was doing that as well. Unfortunately, kids just didn't have a comfortable place in the hobby at this point. They were starting to get, there was a little bit too much complexity for kids. But kids were also changing. And because they were changing, you needed to capture an audience that had a much shorter attention span. And so Chris wanted to do something that was really geared specifically for kids. So he started Chris Martin Enterprises, which was intended to make collectibles that were sports card adjacent and to inspire kids. What he created was dog tags. And then after a couple of years, he created Pro Mags. And then he also created Pro Stamps. He was trying some stuff out to find where kids were, but he was creating things that were sports card-like, that had all the excitement of a player, all the thrill and the appearance of a team, and yet doing something that would grab kids' attention. Stamps is basically stickers. It's a different version of stickers. Pro Mags is, well, refrigerator magnets. I mean, it's, you know, it kind of speaks for itself. And then dog tags was the ability to wear a card around. It was really interesting, the ideas they were coming up with. And yeah, talk about a subject you don't talk about, because look, I was a teenager at the time these were out. I remember them being in Kmart and looking at them and scoffing with, I am not going to do that. I was too sophisticated for it. It wasn't until I was really working on this project, working on the sports card professor project, I should say, it wasn't until I was doing that that I stepped back and went, oh, you know, now I appreciate it. And I have so much respect for what he tried to do. So I'm going to do that again as a standalone video that would be coming out probably in a couple of weeks, along with the Star Jordan card I'm probably going to talk about next week. So I'll definitely look out for those videos. Now, if you haven't subscribed, please do so. And if you haven't had a chance to peruse my various videos talking about stories of cardboard, elevation of cards to the binder of fame, check that stuff out. I've got a whole catalog. And definitely look out for the book reports I'm doing on different sports card channels as I do them. And I guess that's it. So thank you very much for watching.